Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're tracing the absolutely epic, rapidly escalating evolution of fighter jets. We're going to journey all the way from the gritty dogfights of World War II right up to the mind-bending physics of the 22nd century. Look, the history of aerial warfare is honestly one of the most intensely competitive chapters in all of human engineering. We have repeatedly pushed the absolute limits of aerodynamics, metallurgy, propulsion, and more recently, artificial intelligence. So we're going to look at exactly how we got here and perhaps more importantly, where we are going. Let's look at our flight path for today. We're breaking this down into 5 distinct eras. First, the quest for speed. Second, agility and multirole dominance. Third, stealth and sensor fusion. Fourth, hypersonics and full autonomy. And finally, bending the laws of physics. To really ground ourselves before we accelerate through this timeline, we need to understand the 3 monumental philosophical shifts that actually drive this 80-plus year evolution. In the first and second generations, it was all about speed and raw power. Then, from the 1960s to the early 2000s, generations 3 and 4, the focus totally shifted towards sensors and guided weapons. And as we hit the 5th generation and move beyond, warfare becomes primarily about information and networks. It's a complete, fundamental change in how we dominate the sky. And when you lay it out on a timeline, the sheer velocity of human innovation here is just staggering. I mean, we went from basic jet turbines in 1943 to fully networked all-aspect stealth fighters by 2005. Think about that for a second. That is an entire paradigm shift happening in the span of a single human lifetime. All right, let's jump back to the late 1940s with Section 1, the quest for speed, breaking the propeller limit. So the first generation was basically born in the closing days of World War II. At the time, piston-engine aircraft were approaching the speed of sound, but they hit an immovable wall. Compressibility effects in the air made going any faster completely impossible with propellers. Enter the air-breathing gas turbine. This totally revolutionized power-to-weight ratios. Engineers also figured out pretty quickly that sweeping the wings backwards significantly reduced drag at high subsonic speeds. Now, despite this massive leap in propulsion, the combat doctrine was still basically the same as World War II. Visual range dogfighting using primitive avionics and heavy machine guns. Moving into the second generation in 1955, engineers were desperate to shatter the sound barrier. But to do it, they needed an ingenious geometric breakthrough called the area rule. By actually narrowing the midsection of the fuselage into this kind of Coke bottle shape, they significantly reduced wave drag at transonic speeds. It was a brilliant fix. And that area rule, when paired with incredibly fuel-thirsty afterburners, is what allowed the second generation to truly master supersonic flight. Jets of this era, like the F-104 Starfighter and the MiG-21, were primarily these speed-focused interceptors. But you know what? The real revolution here was the weaponry. This generation introduced onboard radar and the very first guided missiles, specifically infrared homing missiles that literally tracked engine heat, and semi-active radar homing missiles that essentially rode a radar beam right to the target. But as we moved into early Cold War conflicts, it became obvious that pure speed wasn't enough. Fighters needed flexibility. Which brings us to Section 2, agility and multirole dominance, expanding the mission profile. See, the second generation had one major glaring flaw. They were mostly single-purpose interceptors. They were built for one specific job. This limitation gave birth to the third generation. We suddenly needed true multi-role fighters capable of handling air superiority, ground attack, and reconnaissance all bundled into one single airframe. To balance the demands of high-speed interception with low-speed operations, engineers introduced variable geometry swing wings. This clever design allowed heavy jets like the F-4 Phantom to execute wildly different mission profiles. But then reality hit hard during the Vietnam War. At the time, the prevailing theory was that all future combat would happen via long-range missiles. It was such a strong belief that some jets were built without internal cannons at all. Well, it turned out early long-range missiles hit their targets a shockingly low 20% of the time. Imagine shooting 10 times and hitting only twice. Plus, strict rules of engagement repeatedly forced pilots right back into close-range dogfights. It proved that regardless of how fast your top speed was, maneuverability was still absolutely essential for survival. That harsh lesson completely rewrote the playbook on aircraft design. Spearheaded by Colonel John Boyd and mathematician Thomas Christie, a new concept called Energy-Maneuverability theory was born. They realized we had to shift the design focus away from just maxing out top speed and instead prioritize sustained turn rates and energy retention.
This brilliant mathematical theory became the absolute foundation for the entire fourth generation's design philosophy.
Now, to actually maximize agility based on that theory, the fourth generation did something pretty wild. Jets like the F-16 were designed with what's called relaxed static stability. In plain terms, they were deliberately designed to be aerodynamically unstable. A human hand literally cannot fly them manually because the jet inherently wants to tumble out of the sky. Sounds terrifying, right? So what was the solution? The fly-by-wire revolution. Old mechanical cables were replaced by a digital computer network that makes dozens of micro adjustments every single second, just to keep the jet flying straight. It was a massive, game-changing leap in maneuverability.
And now we enter the 21st century, where the primary weapon is no longer the missile itself, but the data network behind it. Section 3, Stealth and Sensor Fusion, the Era of Information.
Fifth-generation aircraft function much more like flying information nodes. They use highly specialized, all-aspect geometric shapes to deflect radar waves, combined with radar-absorbent materials that essentially convert radar energy into heat. This renders them practically invisible on standard screens. But their true superpower? Advanced sensor fusion. Instead of a pilot scrambling to look at separate screens, the jet's computers seamlessly fuse data from onboard sensors, external satellites, and wingmen into one single comprehensive tactical display. You throw in supercruise and thrust vectoring nozzles, and jets like the F-22 and F-35 absolutely dominate the modern sky.
But as we look ahead to the upcoming sixth generation, which is actually in active development right now, we're shifting away from exclusively manned flight. The future is human-machine teaming. The programs currently underway will pair human commanders with autonomous, loyal wingman drones. The human pilot basically acts as the quarterback or the brain of the operation, while the drones handle the high-risk tasks. On top of that, these jets will feature adaptive cycle engines that can adjust internal airflow on the fly, maximizing both fuel efficiency and thrust at the exact same time. All right, at this point, we are definitively crossing the timeline from historical reality and active development straight into the purely theoretical, speculative concepts of the late 21st century. Section 4, Hypersonics and Full Autonomy, the Speculative Frontier. Let's jump to the seventh generation, conceptually placed around the year 2050. This is the hypersonic frontier. We are talking mind-boggling speeds of Mach 5 to 8. Traditional turbojets absolutely can't pull this off. It would require scramjets or combined cycle engines. But honestly, the propulsion isn't even the biggest problem. It's atmospheric friction. Flying that fast will literally melt the exterior of the jet. So to survive, these concepts envision active plasma cooling fields, creating a protective layer around the jet, alongside shape-shifting, morphing airframes that physically optimize themselves mid-flight for different speed regimes. It's wild stuff.
By the time we hit the eighth generation, roughly around 2070, organic human limits are discarded entirely. These jets would be completely autonomous, zero pilot in the cockpit. Instead, they'd utilize onboard quantum computers capable of calculating practically infinite battlefield variables and possible scenarios instantly. Furthermore, theorists envision multi-band metamaterial cloaking. This aims to keep the aircraft perfectly hidden, not just from standard radar, but across multiple frequency bands simultaneously.
Finally, we're accelerating into the deep future, centuries from now, where the lines between aircraft, spacecraft, and conventional physics completely vanish. Welcome to Section 5, Bending the Laws of Physics, the Edge of Science Fiction. The ninth generation imagines a completely seamless transition from the lower atmosphere straight into low Earth orbit, what's known as trans-atmospheric flight. To achieve this without lugging around massive, heavy fuel tanks, theorists propose magnetohydrodynamic propulsion powered by an incredibly compact nuclear fusion microreactor. And the structure of the aircraft itself? It would likely be made of organic mechanical hybrid lattices. We're talking carbon-based structures capable of self-assembling and repairing themselves just like living tissue, automatically fixing damaged pathways mid-flight. Reaching the 10th generation, out beyond the year 2200, theorists propose something truly mind-bending. Instead of relying on Newton's third law, pushing something backward to move forward, this generation utilizes general relativity. We're talking about a warp field drive. This creates a space-time metric distortion where the aircraft literally contracts space in front of it and expands space behind it. It's essentially moving the universe around the ship. Because the aircraft itself isn't physically accelerating in the traditional sense, it can maneuver at impossible speeds without ever experiencing a single ounce of G-force strain. Defensively, this ultimate 10th generation aircraft wouldn't bother with standard armor. It would use a dimensional phasing shield. By slightly shifting its quantum state out of sync with our universe, it would let enemy missiles or lasers pass harmlessly right through its physical matter, like a ghost. And orchestrating this whole shebang, not programmed rules, but a truly conscious, sentient artificial general intelligence, capable of instantly running simulations at the quantum level to predict enemy intentions before they even happen.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to take away from this explainer today. If a sentient, warp-capable AI fighter is flawlessly simulating millions of quantum outcomes to protect us, does it represent the ultimate defense system or the absolute obsolescence of humanity in warfare? When our machines become both invincible and conscious, have we perfected our defense or just engineered our own irrelevance? Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the sky and into the deep future. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.